November 12th, 1941, 4:47 a.m., Ranzhuang Village, Hebei Province, North China Plain. The darkness before dawn hung heavy over the frozen fields like a funeral shroud. In the eastern watchtower, barely visible against the lightening sky, Old Chin pressed his weathered ear against the wooden beam, listening to something the Japanese soldiers 800 meters away could never hear, the language of survival spoken in silence. 3 short whistle bursts, a pause, 2 long ones, then nothing. Chen's calloused hand moved to the rope beside him. He pulled twice, setting off a chain reaction that would save 247 lives before breakfast. Below him, in houses scattered across 3 villages, people who had been farmers, teachers, merchants, and mothers 12 months ago moved with the practiced precision of soldiers. They were neither. They were something the Japanese High Command had no manual for, civilians who had weaponized the very air itself. This is the story of how ordinary Chinese villagers, armed with nothing but their wits, their voices, and an intimate knowledge of sound, created an intelligence network so sophisticated that it would baffle Japanese commanders, save thousands of lives, and eventually be studied by resistance movements worldwide. It's the story of how the weakest defeated the strong, not through violence, but through something far more powerful: organized, systematic, and utterly invisible communication. The transformation began exactly 1 year earlier, on a morning that would scar itself into the collective memory of every villager who survived.
November 9th, 1940, the 78th Infantry Regiment of the Imperial Japanese Army's North China Area Army swept through the Hebei flatlands like locusts through wheat. Their objective was simple: eliminate guerrilla resistance by destroying the villages that harbored them. The method was even simpler: the 3 alls policy: kill all, burn all, loot all. Captain Tanaka Yoshihiro, commanding the sweep operation, had received his orders from General Yasuji Akamura himself. The directive was clear: all males between 15 and 60 whom we suspect to be enemies were to be eliminated. There would be no prisoners, no questions, no mercy. At 6:15 a.m., Tanaka's force of 240 soldiers approached Xiaowang Village, population 380, located just 7 kilometers from Ranzhuang. They came in the standard formation: infantry spread across the fields, machine gun teams providing overwatch, mortar crews ready to suppress any resistance. The villagers never had a chance to run. What happened next would be repeated in over 2,500 villages across North China over the following months. The Japanese herded villagers into the village square. Men were separated from women and children. Then the killing began. Systematic, methodical, documented in Japanese military reports with bureaucratic precision. 127 men executed, 43 women, 16 children who tried to run. But 8 villagers escaped. They ran through the early morning darkness, covering the 7 kilometers to Ranzhuang in 38 minutes, arriving breathless and covered in the blood of their families. Among them was a 19-year-old woman named Liu Mei, who had hidden in a grain storage pit and watched through the slats as Japanese soldiers bayoneted her father, her 2 brothers, and her uncle. Liu Mei didn't scream. She didn't cry. She memorized everything: the number of soldiers, their weapons, their movements, the timing of their patrols. When she reached Ranzhuang at 7:03 a.m., she could tell the village leaders exactly what they faced: an enemy that moved without warning, struck without mercy, and left no one alive to spread the alarm. The village committee met in emergency session that same day. Present were Party Secretary Ma Benshi, 43, a former school teacher, Captain Gao Zhenking of the local militia, 36, a farmer who had served in the army, Old Chen Guangwei, 61, who had spent his entire life in these villages and knew every road, path, and hiding place, and Liu Mei herself, who refused to leave despite being urged to rest. Ma Benshi spoke first. We have three choices. We can flee and become refugees. We can surrender and hope for mercy we know won't come. Or we can resist. Resist with what? Someone asked. We have 47 rifles for 2,000 people across our villages. The Japanese have machine guns, mortars, artillery. We can't fight them. It was Old Chen who changed everything. He said, we don't need to fight them. We need to know when they're coming. Every village they destroyed had one thing in common. The Japanese arrived before anyone knew they were there. If we can give our people even 10 minutes warning, they can hide, they can evacuate, they can survive. How? Captain Gao asked. The Japanese control the roads. They have forbidden gatherings. They shoot anyone they find with a radio or telephone. Even sending runners is too dangerous. They'll be caught and executed. Old Chen smiled grimly. Then we won't use runners. We won't use radios or telephones. We'll use something the Japanese can't confiscate, can't destroy, and can't even understand they're hearing. What? The sounds that were here before them. The sounds that will be here after they're gone. We'll turn the entire landscape into a communication network. Bells, drums, bird calls, work songs, the normal sounds of rural life. We'll speak right in front of them, and they'll never know we're saying anything at all. The room fell silent. Then Liu Mei spoke for the first time. Old Chen is right. When the Japanese attacked Xiaowang, they passed 3 other villages. If those villages had known the Japanese were coming, if they could have warned us, my family would still be alive. We need a system, not just for one village, for all of them. A network where every village watches and warns the others. What they devised over the next 2 weeks would become one of the most sophisticated civilian intelligence networks in World War II. They called it Lianfang Jidu, the Joint Defense System. The Japanese never gave it a name, but in their intelligence reports, they referred to it with grudging respect as the Invisible Telegraph.
The system Old Chen designed was deceptively simple on the surface, devastatingly effective in practice. It operated on 3 principles: ubiquity, redundancy, and plausible deniability. First, ubiquity. Every village already produced constant ambient sound. Temple bells marking prayers, work songs in the fields, the calls of vendors, the whistle shepherds used to control their dogs, the drums that marked festivals. These sounds were so common, so normal, that Japanese soldiers didn't even register them anymore. They were the sonic wallpaper of rural China. Old Chen's genius was to transform these everyday sounds into a coded warning system. A temple bell ringing at the normal prayer times meant nothing, but 3 rings, a pause, then 2 more rings at an unusual hour, that was a signal. The Japanese heard a bell. The villagers heard. Japanese patrol moving north on the main road, estimated 30 soldiers, 2 vehicles. Second, redundancy. Information had to flow through multiple channels simultaneously. If the Japanese noticed something suspicious about the bells, the system had to keep functioning through work songs. If they banned singing, the shepherds' whistles would continue. If they shot the shepherds, the women washing clothes at the river
would pick up the warnings through the patterns of how they beat their laundry. Each village had 5 designated watchers who worked in shifts around the clock. These were people with legitimate reasons to be at the village edges. Farmers working their fields, shepherds with their flocks, women gathering firewood, old men who sat by the roadside claiming to sun themselves, but who were actually counting every Japanese soldier that passed. When a watcher spotted Japanese movement, they activated the warning system. The method depended on the time, location, and nature of the threat. A farmer seeing a patrol during the day might begin singing a particular work song, a traditional melody everyone knew, but with subtle changes in timing and repetition that conveyed specific information. Another farmer, 500 meters away, would hear it, understand it, and continue the song with additional variations as they worked their own field, passing the information along like a relay. At night, when singing would be suspicious, the system shifted to other sounds. A dog barking in a particular pattern, the hoot of an owl, which old Chen could mimic perfectly after decades of hunting in these fields. 3 taps on a wooden beam, the creak of a watermill starting up at an unusual hour. Each sound was carefully chosen to blend into the natural soundscape while conveying critical intelligence. Third, plausible deniability. Everything had to have an innocent explanation if questioned. Why was the bell ringing? The monk forgot the time. Why are you singing that song? It's the traditional tune for planting season. Why is your dog barking? There must be a fox near the chicken coop. The system was designed so that even under torture, and the Japanese did torture suspected resistance members, a captured villager could honestly say they were just doing normal activities. The code existed only in the collective understanding of the community. But the code itself was extraordinarily sophisticated. It encoded not just simple yes-no alerts, but detailed tactical intelligence. The number of repetitions indicated troop strength. The interval between signals indicated movement speed. The specific melody or whistle pattern indicated direction. The time of day, combined with other factors, indicated urgency. For example, a complete warning might sound like this. Temple bell rings 3 times. Japanese patrol sighted. 4-second pause. 2 more rings, moving from the east. Shepherd's whistle, high, low, high, approximately 30 to 50 soldiers. Woman at the river begins singing a particular harvest song. They have vehicles. Another woman joins in, deliberately off-key. They are conducting a search operation, not just passing through. A third woman beats her laundry in rapid succession. They are less than 10 minutes away. To Japanese ears, random village sounds. To trained villagers, Japanese patrol of 30 to 50 soldiers with vehicles coming from the east, conducting search operations, arriving in less than 10 minutes. Implement evacuation protocol immediately. The information flow was directional and cascading. Outer villages watched the roads and sent warnings inward. Inner villages had more time to respond. If a threat passed one village heading toward another, the first village would send the warning forward while the third village would prepare to alert villages beyond. The system created overlapping circles of awareness that meant no village was ever truly surprised. But information didn't just flow inward for defense, it also flowed outward for intelligence gathering. When Japanese forces established a new position, the watchers noted it. When they changed their patrol patterns, the network tracked it. When supply convoys passed through, their numbers and cargo were observed and recorded. All this intelligence was systematically collected by the local militia and Communist Party organizers, who used it to plan their own operations and pass information to regular Chinese forces. The Japanese never realized that the network existed because they fundamentally misunderstood what they were facing. To them, Chinese peasants were ignorant, passive, easily cowed. The idea that these illiterate farmers could create and operate a communications network that functioned 24 hours a day across dozens of villages, transmitting detailed tactical intelligence in real time through innocent-seeming sounds, was just beyond their conceptual framework. But the system had to be learned, practiced, and constantly refined. That work began immediately after the founding meeting.
Ma Benshi, the school teacher turned resistance organizer, understood that the network would only work if everyone understood their role. He began by identifying the key communicators in each village, people with strong voices, good memories, natural rhythm, and the discipline to remain calm under pressure. Liu Mei became one of the primary trainers. Her experience at Shaowang had burned away any hesitation. She worked primarily with the women, teaching them the laundry beating codes, the washing songs, the calls they would use while collecting firewood or working in the vegetable gardens near the village edges. The training was intensive and continuous. Participants had to memorize dozens of sound patterns and their meanings. They had to practice producing these sounds naturally, without hesitation or obvious signals. They had to learn to listen, really listen to the ambient noise around them, picking out the meaningful signals from the background chaos. Old Chen worked with the watchers, teaching them observation skills, how to estimate troop numbers from the sound of marching feet, how to identify vehicle types from engine noise, how to judge distance and speed, how to read Japanese body language and predict their intentions. Most importantly, how to remain invisible while watching. The art of looking like you were doing something mundane while actually conducting military reconnaissance. Captain Gao trained the quick response teams, the villagers who would implement evacuation procedures when warnings came. They practiced moving people into the tunnels that were beginning to be dug beneath the villages. They rehearsed evacuating the elderly and children into the fields where they could hide in grain storage pits or among the tall crops. They learned to move silently, quickly, without panic. The system went live on December 1st, 1940. It proved itself 3 days later. December 4th, 1940, 9:23 a.m. Watcher Position 3 arrives overlooking the main road 2 kilometers east of Ranzhuang. Chen Yang, a 32-year-old farmer, was ostensibly repairing a section of irrigation ditch. In reality, he was watching the road. He saw them before he heard them, a column of Japanese soldiers emerging from the morning mist. Chen Yang continued working, counting silently. 28, 31, 36 soldiers, 2 officers on horseback, 3 trucks, moving slowly, searching the sides of the road. A sweep operation, not a patrol passing through. His hand moved to the whistle carved from bamboo that hung around his neck, disguised as a good luck charm. 3 short blasts, enemy sighted. A pause, 1 long, 1 short, moving from east. Another pause, 5 short, large force, more than 20 soldiers. Then he began singing a work song, a traditional melody about repairing irrigation channels, but he added extra verses that indicated the Japanese had vehicles and were conducting searches. 500 meters away, another watcher heard him, Old Man Li, who was supposed to be collecting firewood. He took up the song, adding his own verses that pushed the warning toward the village, while he hobbled away, moving faster than his apparent age suggested. By the time the Japanese column was 1.5 kilometers from Ranzhuang, the warning had reached the village center. The temple bell rang. 3 times. Pause. 2 times. Then nothing. The village erupted into practiced chaos. The evacuation protocols were executed with shocking efficiency. Women grabbed emergency packs hidden near every household: water, rice, medicine. Men herded children toward the tunnel entrances, hidden in wells, under kitchen floors, behind false walls in animal pens. The elderly who couldn't move quickly were helped into the grain storage pits, covered with straw. Livestock were driven into the fields, creating the appearance of normal afternoon activity. Within 7 minutes, 347 villagers had vanished. When the Japanese soldiers entered Ranzhuang at 9:44 a.m., they found an apparently normal village. A few elderly people sitting outside their homes, some chickens scratching in the dirt, the normal sounds of rural life. No men of military age, no indication of resistance activity. Captain Tanaka, leading the sweep, was suspicious. Where is everyone? An old woman, carefully selected for this role, bowed respectfully. Working in the fields, Honorable Sir. It is planting season. The men are sowing winter wheat. I see no one in the fields. The fields are very large, sir. The village is poor. Everyone must work far from the village to farm enough land to eat. It was plausible. The Japanese had been through dozens of villages with similar explanations. Tanaka ordered his men to search anyway. They found nothing. The tunnels remained undiscovered. The people hiding in the fields stayed perfectly still, even the children drugged with small amounts of opium to keep them quiet. After 90 minutes, the Japanese moved on, frustrated but with no evidence of resistance. As soon as they left, the all-clear signal went out, a different pattern of temple bells and shepherd's whistles. The villagers emerged. No one had been killed. No one had been captured. The system had worked. But Tanaka wasn't fooled. He reported to his superiors. Village Ranzhuang is possibly harboring resistance sympathizers. Population disappeared during our search. Recommend follow-up operation to catch them by surprise. The invisible war had begun.
The Japanese adapted. So did the villagers. Over the following months, the contest between the occupation forces and the warning network became increasingly sophisticated. A deadly game of pattern recognition and counter-pattern. The Japanese started varying their approach routes, trying to enter villages from unexpected directions. The villagers expanded their watcher positions to cover all approaches. They recruited children as spotters, kids playing by the roadside, tending geese, whose presence was so innocent that Japanese soldiers ignored them. These children learned their own simplified signal systems. A boy flying a kite in a certain pattern meant Japanese approaching from the north. A girl herding geese who let them cross the road meant vehicles were coming. The Japanese began conducting night raids, hoping to catch villagers before the warning system could activate. The villagers shifted to nocturnal signals, the carefully timed creak of watermill wheels, the specific hoot patterns of night birds, even the number of times a dog barked before quieting down. Old Chen recruited every shepherd in the surrounding villages to train their dogs to bark on command in specific patterns. To the Japanese, it just sounded like rural dogs barking at night, as rural dogs have done since dogs existed. To the villagers, each bark was a word in an ongoing sentence describing Japanese movements. One Japanese commander, Captain Akira Yamamoto, became obsessed with cracking the system. He was certain the villagers were communicating, but he couldn't prove how. He tried banning temple bell ringing. The villagers switched to drums. He banned drums. They switched to work songs. He banned singing in the fields. They switched to the rhythmic chopping of hoes against the ground, the patterns of women beating laundry, the specific ways men called to their water buffalo. Yamamoto captured and interrogated a suspected watcher,
a farmer named Zhang Wei. He tortured him for 3 days. Zhang Wei admitted he sometimes sang while working. He admitted he rang the temple bell when it was his turn as the village caretaker. He admitted he watched the roads sometimes because he was curious about Japanese movements. But he couldn't explain any code because there was no written code to explain. The system existed entirely in the collective practice of the community. Zhang Wei died without revealing anything useful. His death taught the Japanese nothing. It taught the villagers everything they needed to know about Japanese brutality. The network expanded, becoming more determined, more sophisticated, more widespread. By March 1941, the Joint Defense System covered over 40 villages across 150 square kilometers. Information flowed through it like water through irrigation channels. The Japanese could not move anywhere in this area without being observed, reported, and tracked. Their every patrol was shadowed by invisible watchers. Their every supply convoy was counted. Their every officer was identified and his habits noted. The intelligence flowing through the network was remarkably detailed. Village watchers noted that Captain Tanaka always stopped his column for a 10-minute rest exactly 35 minutes into any march. Captain Yamamoto personally checked every house during searches, always starting from the west side of a village. A certain lieutenant always positioned machine gun teams on high ground. A sergeant always detailed 2 men to check wells and storage pits. All this information was collected, analyzed, and used. When the Communist 8th Route Army planned operations in the area, they consulted with the civilian network. The villagers told them where the Japanese were weak, where their patrols were predictable, where their supply dumps were poorly guarded. The military operations succeeded because civilians had done the intelligence gathering. But the network's primary purpose remained civilian protection. Between December 1940 and June 1941, Japanese forces conducted 23 sweep operations in the networked villages. They killed 17 people, a horrific number, but a fraction of what would have occurred without warning. Comparing the 17 deaths in networked villages to the 2,400 plus killed in non-networked villages during the same period demonstrated the system's effectiveness with brutal mathematical clarity. The Japanese knew something was wrong. Their kill ratios in this area were far lower than elsewhere. Villages seemed to empty out before their arrival. Resistance fighters appeared and disappeared without being tracked, but they couldn't identify the mechanism. Intelligence experts listened to Chinese radio frequencies and heard nothing. Counterintelligence operatives infiltrated villages and heard only ordinary sounds. The network operated below the level of Japanese conceptual awareness, until the night Lieutenant Matsuo Koji accidentally discovered the truth.
May 17, 1941, 11:47 p.m. Lieutenant Matsuo Koji, 28, intelligence officer with the 78th Infantry Regiment, was conducting a solo reconnaissance. This was irregular. Officers rarely operated alone, but Matsuo was different. He had studied anthropology at Kyoto Imperial University before the war. He was curious about Chinese culture, spoke some Mandarin, and believed that understanding the enemy was the key to defeating them. He was hidden in a drainage ditch 400 meters from Ranzhuang when he heard it. A specific pattern of dog barks, followed by an owl hoot, followed by more barking from a different dog further away, followed by another owl hoot in the distance. The pattern was too precise, too timed, too coordinated. Dogs don't bark in synchronized patterns. Owls don't respond to dogs that predictably. Matsuo stayed hidden, listening. Over the next hour, he heard more patterns. A water mill starting up briefly, then stopping. Then another mill in the distance. Then the first mill again. Temple bells ringing at midnight. Unusual, but perhaps a prayer time. Then more bells from another village, a different pattern. Then the first bells again, responding. His anthropological training kicked in. This was communication. It had to be. But who was communicating? About what? To verify his hypothesis, he needed to test it. At 1:15 a.m., he deliberately made noise, scuffing his boots against the stone, coughing quietly. If the sounds were a communication network, they should respond to a potential threat. He waited. 3 minutes later, the dog barking started again. Different pattern, more urgent. Within 5 minutes, every dog within a kilometer was barking. Then the pattern stopped abruptly. Then a single owl hoot, long and clear. Then silence. Matsuo smiled grimly. He'd found it. The villagers were using sound itself as a telegraph system. But how sophisticated was it? How much information could they transmit? He needed to know more before reporting this. Over the next 3 nights, he returned to different positions around Ranzhuang, always alone, always hidden, always listening. He began to recognize patterns. Different sounds meant different things. The number of repetitions mattered. The intervals mattered. The combination of different sounds created more complex messages. He couldn't crack the code completely. That would take months. But he understood the architecture of the system. On May 21st, he reported his findings to Captain Yamamoto. Yamamoto was skeptical, but authorized a test. They would conduct a secret night movement, telling no one except essential personnel, and observe how the villages responded. That night, at 2:30 a.m., a Japanese patrol of 15 men moved toward Ranzhuang from an unexpected direction, under strict orders to maintain absolute silence. They approached within 800 meters of the village before Matsuo, watching from a different position, heard the first signal. A dog barking, then another, then an owl, then more bells. The sequence was faster, more urgent than he'd heard before. By the time the patrol reached the village outskirts at 2:52 a.m., it was deserted. Every person gone. Every potential resistance fighter vanished. The warning had reached them somehow, despite the secrecy, despite the silence, despite the unexpected approach. The system had worked. Yamamoto was convinced. He immediately reported to regimental command. The response was swift. If the villagers are using sounds to communicate, then we will eliminate the sounds. Issue orders for Operation Silent Night.
The directive came from Colonel Nakajima Takeshi, commander of Japanese forces in the Hebei sector. It was simple, brutal, and comprehensive. All temple bells in areas suspected of resistance activity are to be removed and melted down. All drums are to be confiscated. Singing in fields is forbidden. Shepherds caught using whistles will be shot. Any dog found barking at night will be killed. Any unusual sound after curfew will be treated as enemy activity and responded to with lethal force. Operation Silent Night began on May 28, 1941. Japanese soldiers swept through villages, stripping them of anything that could produce sound. Temple bells that had rung for centuries were torn down. Ceremonial drums were smashed or confiscated. Whistles were collected and burned. In some villages, the Japanese shot every dog they could find, leaving corpses scattered through the streets as a warning. The effect was immediate and devastating.
The network went silent. Villagers no longer dared to sing in the fields. The warning system collapsed. Japanese patrols began achieving surprise again. On June 3rd, a sweep operation in Shaohei village caught the villagers unprepared. 47 people were killed. At an emergency meeting of the network organizers, despair threatened to overwhelm them. "They've taken away our voices," Ma Benshi said. "How can we warn each other if we can't make sounds?" Liu Mei was the one who saw the solution. "Then we won't use sounds we make," she said. "We'll use sounds that are already there, the sounds that Japanese can't eliminate." What sounds? The wind, the rain, the birds they can't kill, the creaking of old buildings, the rustling of crops. We'll learn to speak in the language of nature itself. It seemed impossible, but they had no choice. The adaptation began immediately.
What the villagers created over the following weeks was something that pushed the boundaries of human communication. They learned to use environmental sounds, things the Japanese couldn't control or eliminate, as their telegraph system. The wind became a carrier of information. Villagers hung pieces of cloth and metal at specific locations where they would flutter or chime in the wind. The patterns of movement and sound created by wind could be controlled by adjusting the size, weight, and placement of these objects. A piece of cloth at a certain height would flutter visibly in even a light breeze. A heavier cloth would only move in stronger winds. Metal pieces would chime in specific pitches. By arranging these objects in patterns, villagers could create information that could be read from a distance by watching and listening to how they responded to the wind. The Japanese noticed the cloth and metal pieces, but dismissed them as good luck charms or decorations. They were everywhere in rural China, nothing suspicious. Rain created opportunities. Villagers modified the drainage systems around their houses and villages to produce different sounds when rain fell. A particular gutter would create a specific splashing pattern. A drainage hole would produce a particular pitch of dripping. During rain, which muffled normal sound and reduced visibility, information could flow through these modified drainage patterns. The Japanese heard rain dripping and water flowing. The villagers heard Japanese patrol delayed by weather, road washed out near East Village, opportunity for supply movement. Birds couldn't be eliminated, and the villagers became experts at bird behavior. They learned that certain birds reacted to human movement in predictable ways. Crows would take flight when disturbed. Their flight patterns indicated the direction of movement. Magpies would call in specific ways depending on whether they saw soldiers or civilians. By observing bird behavior across a landscape, trained watchers could track Japanese movements without ever seeing the Japanese themselves. The villagers even learned to weaponize their own vulnerability. Old buildings creaked in predictable ways. The villagers deliberately left certain boards loose, certain doors prone to swing in the wind, certain structures ready to make noise. When a Japanese patrol passed nearby, the structures would creak and groan from the vibrations of heavy boots and vehicles. The pattern of creaking would indicate the size and speed of the patrol. The Japanese heard old buildings being old buildings. The villagers heard intelligence. The most remarkable adaptation involved the crops themselves. The North China Plain grows wheat, corn, and sorghum, tall crops that rustle in the wind. Villagers learned to recognize the sound difference between wind-rustled corn and Japanese soldier-disturbed corn. From 200 meters away while cooking dinner, a grandfather could tell you that the birds taking flight near the eastern field indicated 8 to 10 men moving south, based on the number of birds and their flight pattern. The Japanese never understood what they were facing. They had successfully eliminated the obvious communication methods. Bells, drums, singing, whistles. They thought they had broken the system. In reality, they had only forced it to evolve beyond their comprehension. By July 1941, the network was functioning again, now completely invisible to Japanese detection. Captain Yamamoto noted in his reports, "Intelligence suggests villagers are still receiving advance warning of our operations through unknown means. Interrogations produce no useful information. Recommend further investigation." But there was nothing to investigate. The villagers weren't doing anything. Nature was doing it for them. They had only learned to listen.
The network's success came at a terrible price. The Japanese, frustrated by their inability to catch villagers by surprise, escalated their brutality. If they couldn't prevent warnings, they would make the warnings irrelevant through overwhelming force. The three alls policy intensified. Villages weren't just searched, they were destroyed. Crops were burned, wells were poisoned, livestock slaughtered. The Japanese reasoned that if they eliminated the infrastructure that allowed villagers to live in an area, the resistance would collapse. Between June and September 1941, over 15,000 civilians were killed in Hebei province alone. The network members themselves became targets. The Japanese offered rewards for information about resistance organizers. Some villagers, broken by torture or motivated by survival, informed. 23 network organizers were captured and executed between May and October 1941. Liu Mei was captured on August 17th. A collaborator had identified her as a key trainer in the system. The Japanese interrogator, Lieutenant Matsuo himself, tried to get her to explain how the network operated. She told him everything about the bells and drums, information the Japanese already knew and had already neutralized. She said nothing about the environmental sound system, because there was nothing to say. We listen to the wind, we watch the birds, we pay attention to the world around us. Matsuo thought she was being poetic or deliberately obtuse. He didn't understand she was being completely literal. After 3 days of interrogation that left her permanently injured, Liu Mei was executed by firing squad. She was 20 years old. Old Chen lasted longer. He was arrested in September after a Japanese patrol caught him apparently doing nothing except standing in a field, watching and listening. They had no evidence he was doing anything illegal, but his behavior was suspicious. He was held for 2 weeks, questioned daily, beaten regularly. He maintained he was just an old farmer who liked to observe nature. They eventually released him due to lack of evidence. He died 2 months later from internal injuries sustained during the beatings. Before he died, he trained his replacement, his grandson, Chen Yong, who had been the first watcher to test the system back in December. The network continued. Ma Benshi survived the war, but never recovered from what he witnessed. In a memoir written in 1958, he calculated that the Joint Defense System saved approximately 12,000 civilian lives between December 1940 and August 1945. It also contributed intelligence that enabled dozens of successful military operations against Japanese forces. But he never forgot the cost. 187 network members killed, hundreds more injured or traumatized, thousands of non-members killed in reprisals when the Japanese couldn't find the actual resistance members. We spoke in whispers of wind and birdsong, but our words were written in blood.
News of the network's success spread through the Chinese resistance. Other villages began implementing similar systems. Communist Party organizers studying guerrilla warfare took careful notes. The concept of using environmental sounds and civilian observation networks was incorporated into training materials for resistance forces throughout occupied China. By 1943, the Japanese were facing similar systems in villages across multiple provinces. Each area adapted the concept to local conditions. Coastal villages used the patterns of tide and waves. Mountain villages used echoes and avalanche sounds. River villages used water flow and boat traffic. The underlying principle remained constant: transform the ambient environment into a communication network that the occupiers couldn't detect because it didn't look like communication. The system's success attracted attention beyond China. In 1944, a Soviet intelligence officer studying Chinese resistance tactics wrote, "The Chinese civilians have achieved something remarkable, a communications network that requires no technology, leaves no physical evidence, and operates in plain sight of the enemy." This deserves serious study by all partisan forces. After the war, the concept influenced resistance movements in Vietnam, Malaya, the Philippines, and later insurgencies worldwide. The Viet Cong's famous tunnel networks were partly inspired by Chinese civilian defense systems. Vietnamese villagers employed similar sound-based warning systems adapted to their jungle environment. The strategic impact was significant, but difficult for conventional military minds to quantify. How do you measure the value of intelligence that prevented massacres? How do you calculate the military advantage of knowing enemy positions without radios or scouts? The Japanese never solved this puzzle. They could count their losses, but they couldn't understand why they were losing. By 1942, Japanese intelligence had compiled enough data to recognize a disturbing pattern. In areas with organized civilian observation networks, their operational effectiveness dropped by 60 to 70%. Sweep operations that should have caught resistance fighters came up empty. Supply convoys were ambushed with suspicious frequency. Garrison positions were mortared with unnervingly accurate targeting. Colonel Nakajima, reviewing the statistics, noted in his report, "Enemy forces in this sector demonstrate intelligence capabilities that exceed their apparent technical capacity. They possess no radio equipment. They have no aerial reconnaissance. Yet they know our positions, our movements, and our intentions with precision that suggests sophisticated intelligence gathering. Source unknown, countermeasures ineffective." The source wasn't unknown, it was invisible. Every Japanese soldier who walked down a road was observed by farmers working nearby fields. Every garrison was watched by old men who sat outside their homes all day with nothing to do but observe. Every supply convoy was counted by women collecting firewood who happened to be near the road when it passed. The intelligence gathered by thousands of eyes flowed through the sound-based network to Chinese commanders who used it to devastating effect. The Japanese tried saturation tactics. If they couldn't prevent observation, they would overwhelm the network with so much activity that the villagers couldn't track it all. They increased patrols, varied timing and routes, split forces and recombined them randomly. The network adapted. More watchers were recruited. Children too young to be suspected of resistance activity became the network's eyes. An 8-year-old boy flying a kite was invisible to Japanese security concerns. But that boy could watch a road for hours, counting every soldier, every vehicle, noting every detail. When he came home for dinner, he would tell his mother what he'd seen. She would encode it into the evening sounds, the way she called her chickens to roost, the specific pattern of her knife chopping vegetables, the rhythm of her sweeping the courtyard. Japanese intelligence officers pulled their hair out trying to crack the code. They arrested children. The children knew nothing. They were just playing and happened to mention to their parents what they'd seen. They arrested the mothers. The mothers were just doing household chores. Where was the code? Where were the messages? there was nothing concrete to find. Lieutenant Matsuo, now promoted to captain after his discovery of the sound-based system, remained obsessed with destroying the network. In December 1942, he proposed Operation Complete Silence, forcibly relocate all villages in resistance-heavy areas, concentrating the population in fortified camps where they could be controlled and monitored. The proposal was approved. Between January and April 1943, over 40,000 civilians in Hebei province were forcibly relocated to concentration camps the Japanese called protected villages. The old villages were burned, the crops were destroyed, the landscape was cleared to eliminate hiding places and observation positions. It was a humanitarian catastrophe. Thousands died from disease, malnutrition, and brutal treatment in the camps. But from a Japanese military perspective, it worked. The observation network in those areas collapsed. Resistance operations became less effective. Intelligence gathering dropped to almost nothing. Yet even in the camps, the network survived in modified form. Prisoners used the timing of when they lined up for food distribution to pass information. The patterns of how laundry was hung to dry encoded messages. The number of times someone coughed during evening roll call conveyed intelligence about guard rotations and weak points in the wire. The Japanese had concentrated the problem, not eliminated it. And outside the camps, in areas where the Japanese lacked the resources to implement such drastic measures, the network continued operating. By 1943, it had evolved to the point where it was nearly unkillable. It existed not in any physical infrastructure, but in the collective knowledge and practice of the communities. You couldn't confiscate it, you couldn't destroy it, you couldn't even really identify it. It was everywhere and nowhere, invisible and omnipresent.
September 1943 marked a turning point that demonstrated the network's true military value. The 8th Route Army was planning a major operation, an ambush of a Japanese supply convoy carrying ammunition and winter equipment essential for upcoming operations. The success of the ambush depended entirely on accurate intelligence, the exact timing of the convoy, its size, its escort strength, its route. Traditional military intelligence gathering would have required scouts, radio communications, and weeks of preparation. The civilian network provided everything in 3 days. On September 11th, watchers 60 kilometers away observed a large convoy being assembled at a Japanese depot. The information flowed through the network. 47 trucks, heavily loaded, estimated 200 soldier escort, preparing for movement. The direction and likely route were determined by observing which roads the Japanese were checking for obstacles. On September 12th, the convoy departed. Its movement was tracked in real time by successive villages along the route. The information flowed ahead of it. Convoy passed East Ridge Village at 9:15 a.m., moving slowly due to poor road conditions, still 47 trucks, escorts spread out a long column. The network provided updates every 30 to 60 minutes as the convoy moved through the countryside. The 8th Route Army commanders received intelligence that was fresher than anything a modern military with radio communications could achieve, because the intelligence gatherers were everywhere, invisible and reporting constantly through their sound-based system. On September 13th at 2:47 p.m., the convoy entered the ambush zone. The 8th Route Army forces, positioned based on exact intelligence about timing and disposition, destroyed 35 trucks and killed or captured over 140 Japanese soldiers. The ambush succeeded because the attackers knew exactly when the convoy would arrive, exactly how it was organized, and exactly where its weaknesses were. The intelligence had been gathered by farmers, grandmothers, children, and shopkeepers. It had been transmitted by the sounds of wind chimes, bird movements, and the rustling of crops. The Japanese never knew what hit them because they never understood they were being watched by an entire population that had turned observation into a military art. One aspect of the network that deserves special attention was the role of women. In the traditional Chinese rural society, women were often dismissed as unimportant by the Japanese occupiers. This made them perfect intelligence agents. Women worked in and around the home, positions that were both stationary enough to observe and mobile enough to gather information. They visited each other's homes, exchanged gossip at the well, worked together in the fields. All of these normal social interactions became opportunities to pass intelligence. A group of women in Ranzhuang developed a particularly sophisticated subsystem they called ghost listening, the practice of detecting Japanese movements by sound alone, without visual confirmation. They trained themselves to identify specific sounds at distances that seemed impossible. Mrs. Zhang Li Jun, 43, a widow whose husband had been killed by the Japanese in 1941, became legendary for this ability. She could distinguish between different types of Japanese vehicles by engine sound from over a kilometer away. She could estimate the number of soldiers in a marching unit by the rhythm of their footsteps, heard through the ground, literally pressing her ear to the earth to feel the vibrations. She could tell the difference between Japanese soldiers and Chinese collaborationist troops by the pattern of their movements and the sounds of their equipment. In November 1943, Mrs. Zong detected an unusual sound, a deep, rhythmic rumbling she'd never heard before. It wasn't trucks, it wasn't standard military vehicles. She listened for 3 days, tracking the sound as it moved around Japanese positions, noting its patterns. Finally, she identified it. Tanks. The Japanese were bringing armor into the region. This intelligence passed through the network, reached 8th Route Army commanders who immediately adjusted their tactics. Instead of planning direct assaults on Japanese positions, they focused on tank traps and anti-armor ambushes. When the Japanese launched their offensive in December with tank support, they discovered roads blocked, bridges destroyed, and narrow passages where their armor became vulnerable to close-range attack. The offensive failed, partially because one widow had listened to sounds in the earth and identified a threat 3 weeks before it became operational. Mrs. Zong trained other women in ghost listening. By early 1944, the network included dozens of women who could identify Japanese activities by sound alone. They became the network's early warning system, detecting threats before visual observation was possible. The Japanese never knew these women existed. Intelligence reports mentioned unexplained enemy foreknowledge of our operations, but never connected it to the middle-aged women they passed on the roads, who bowed respectfully while memorizing every detail of what they saw and heard.
Equally important were the children. By 1943, the Japanese had learned to be suspicious of adult civilians, but children remained below their threat threshold. This was a fatal mistake. The network organized what they privately called the Children's Brigade, kids between ages 6 and 14 who served as mobile observers. These children had several advantages. They were ignored by Japanese soldiers, they could move freely without suspicion, they had excellent memories, and they could report information through completely innocent-seeming means. A typical operation might work like this. A boy named Little Wang, age 9, would be sent to tend his family's geese near a road where Japanese activity was suspected. He would spend the day playing, apparently paying no attention to anything except his geese, but he was counting every soldier that passed, every vehicle, every weapon he could identify. He noted the time by the position of the sun. He observed officers and tried to remember their faces. He listened to conversations, picking up Japanese words and phrases that had become common. When he returned home at dusk, his mother would ask him about his day in a completely normal way. Did the geese behave? Yes, mother, but they scattered 3 times. once when the big trucks went by, once when the soldiers marched past, and once when the black car with the flag went by. Each scattering was a piece of intelligence, 3 events. Big trucks meant supply convoy. Marching soldiers meant infantry patrol. Black car with flag meant officer movement. The mother would encode this information into her evening activities, the pattern of how she hung laundry, the rhythm of her cooking sounds, the timing of when she called everyone to dinner. Other women would observe and decode, passing the information along. The children themselves rarely knew they were part of an intelligence network. They thought they were just answering their parents' normal questions about their day. This meant that even if a child was questioned by Japanese soldiers, they would answer honestly and reveal nothing, because they genuinely didn't know they were doing anything except talking to their mother. The Children's Brigade provided intelligence that adults couldn't gather. Children could get close to Japanese positions by pretending to chase a ball or look for lost livestock. They could linger near Japanese discussions because soldiers talking strategy rarely thought to send children away. They could observe for hours because a child playing looked completely normal. Little Wang himself provided the intelligence that saved Ranzhuang from a surprise night attack in March 1944. He had noticed Japanese soldiers measuring distances along a road and marking specific locations. He mentioned this casually to his mother. She recognized it as preparation for an artillery strike. The Japanese were registering their guns, marking distances so they could shell the village without forward observers. The warning allowed villagers to evacuate before the bombardment began. The shells destroyed buildings, but killed no one. Dozens of children like Little Wang operated throughout the network. The Japanese, when they eventually learned about this after the war, were shocked. They had been defeated in part by 9-year-olds with geese.
By 1944, the war was turning against Japan. American submarines were strangling their supply lines. Chinese forces, both communist and nationalist, were growing stronger. The Japanese army in China was increasingly on the defensive, trying to hold vast territories with insufficient forces. In this environment, the civilian observation networks became even more valuable. As Japanese forces concentrated in urban areas and major strongpoints, the countryside became a patchwork of contested territory. The networks expanded to cover these areas, providing intelligence that enabled Chinese forces to avoid Japanese strength and strike at weakness. The Japanese response was to withdraw from many rural areas entirely, abandoning villages and consolidating in defensible positions. This seemed strategic, but was actually an admission of defeat. They couldn't control the countryside because they couldn't stop the population from watching them, reporting on them, and undermining them through passive resistance. In the areas they still controlled, the Japanese became increasingly brutal. The desperation showed in Operation Ichigo, 1944, a massive offensive designed to secure a land corridor from Manchuria to Southeast Asia. The operation succeeded militarily. The Japanese captured huge amounts of territory, but they couldn't hold it because the civilian population remained hostile, watching, waiting, reporting. The observation networks tracked Japanese movements during Ichigo with precision. Chinese forces received updates on Japanese positions, strength, and intentions that allowed them to evacuate ahead of the offensive, preserve their forces, and prepare for counterattacks. When the Japanese tried to consolidate their gains, they found themselves occupying hostile territory
where every civilian was a potential observer. Every sound might be a signal, and no movement went unnoticed. By 1945, Japanese soldiers in China were exhausted, demoralized, and paranoid. They trusted no one. They feared the countryside. They stayed in their fortified positions when possible, venturing out only when absolutely necessary. The civilian networks hadn't defeated them through violence. They had made occupation psychologically unbearable. Captain Matsuo, who had spent 4 years trying to crack the network, wrote in his diary in June 1945, "We have lost the battle of intelligence. The Chinese see everything, know everything, and communicate in ways we cannot detect or prevent. Every soldier feels the eyes watching him. Every patrol expects ambush. Every officer assumes the enemy knows his plans. This is not sustainable. We hold the cities, but the countryside holds us in contempt and watches us die." Matsuo was killed in July 1945, shot by a sniper who had been positioned based on intelligence from the civilian network. The sniper knew exactly when Matsuo would inspect a forward position, because watchers had tracked his daily routine for weeks, noting that he always conducted inspections at the same time. The information had been transmitted through the usual means: environmental sounds, innocent activities, the invisible telegraph.
When Japan surrendered in August 1945, the villages of Hebei province celebrated, but the celebration was bittersweet. The networks had saved thousands of lives, but thousands more had been lost. Every village had martyrs, people killed by the Japanese for real or suspected resistance activity. Ranzhuang, where the system had begun, had lost 143 of its residents to Japanese violence during the war, but it had saved 2,300 people through early warning and intelligence gathering. The mathematics of survival were clear. Without the network, the death toll would have been far higher. The Communist Party, recognizing the network's success, incorporated its principles into their military doctrine. During the Chinese Civil War, 1945 to 1949, similar civilian intelligence networks helped communist forces defeat the better-equipped nationalists. The Americans, supporting the nationalists, discovered the same frustrating reality the Japanese had faced. You can't fight an enemy who knows your every move, because an entire population is watching and reporting. The principles developed in those Hebei villages influenced insurgent and counterinsurgent doctrine worldwide. The U.S. military, studying why they lost in Vietnam, examined Chinese civilian resistance and noted the importance of population support and civilian intelligence networks. The concept of winning hearts and minds partly came from understanding that an hostile population becomes an intelligence asset for the enemy. In 1982, the Chinese government opened a museum in Ranzhuang dedicated to the civilian resistance during the Japanese occupation. The museum displays the tunnels that were dug beneath the village, over 16 kilometers of underground passages where villagers hid during Japanese sweeps. But the museum barely mentions the sound-based intelligence network. It's mentioned in passing as one of many resistance techniques. This is partly because the network's sophistication is difficult to explain. How do you display in a museum a system that existed
only in collective practice. How do you demonstrate communication methods that used wind, birds, and the rustling of crops? The physical artifacts, the cloth that hung in the wind, the modified drainage systems, the sound gardens, no longer exist or no longer make sense without the trained ears that understood them. The few surviving network members were interviewed in the 1980s and 1990s. Their accounts were recorded, but many interviewers didn't fully understand what they were describing. The sophistication of the system seemed exaggerated, almost mythological. Could peasants really have created something so complex? Could environmental sounds really carry that much information? Professor Lin Xiaoting of Beijing Normal University studied the network as part of his doctoral dissertation in 2003. His conclusion: the civilian observation and warning networks of occupied North China represent one of the most sophisticated non-technological communication systems in military history. They demonstrate that intelligence gathering is fundamentally about human observation and analysis. Technology amplifies these capabilities, but is not essential. A motivated population with organizational structure and training can achieve intelligence effects that rival technical systems. His research was largely ignored by military historians focused on conventional warfare and technology. But intelligence professionals took notice. The CIA's study of civilian resistance movements cites the Chinese networks as an example of organic intelligence architecture. Intelligence systems that grow from the population itself rather than being imposed from the outside.
In 2007, Chen Mingju died at age 89. She was the last surviving member of the original network organizers, the last person who had been trained by old Chen himself. Before she died, she gave an interview to a local television station. The interviewer asked her to demonstrate how the system worked. She smiled and led him outside. It was a windy day. She pointed to trees, to crops in nearby fields, to birds flying overhead. "Listen," she said. "What do you hear? Wind, birds, normal countryside sounds." "Exactly. Now listen again. The wind from the east is stronger. That means weather changing, maybe rain tomorrow. The birds are flying low and agitated. Something disturbed them about 10 minutes ago, probably from that direction. The crops are rustling in a pattern that suggests someone walked through them recently, going that way." The interviewer looked confused. "But those are just natural observations." "Yes, and if I wanted to tell someone something without speaking, I could hang cloth that would move in this wind, showing them the weather is changing. I could disturb those birds at a specific time, indicating direction. I could walk through those crops in a pattern that conveys information to someone watching from a distance." The Japanese never understood. We didn't invent a code. We learned to speak the language that was always there. She paused, looking at the landscape with eyes that had watched it for 8 decades. During the war, everyone knew this language. Children learned it from parents. Women taught each other. Even the old ones who couldn't fight learned to listen and understand. Now, no one remembers. The language is dead. "Do you think people should learn it again?" She shook her head. "I hope they never need to. We learned because we had to, because the alternative was death. I wouldn't wish that necessity on anyone." The interview ended with her standing in the wind,
listening to sounds that meant nothing to anyone else, speaking a language that had died with the need for it. The final accounting of the civilian observation networks is necessarily incomplete. How do you measure what didn't happen? How do you count the lives saved by warnings that prevented massacres? How do you calculate the intelligence value of thousands of civilian observers who never appeared in any military record? Some statistics are clear. Over 300 villages in Hebei province alone participated in organized observation networks by 1943. Estimated 15,000 to 20,000 civilians actively participated as watchers, communicators, or trainers. Japanese military records note unexplained enemy foreknowledge in over 400 operations between 1941 and 1945 in network-covered areas. Civilian casualty rates in villages with active networks were approximately 60 to 70% lower than in non-networked villages during comparable periods. At least 200 identified network members were executed by the Japanese, actual number likely much higher. The networks provided intelligence support for hundreds of resistance and military operations. But the real impact was psychological and strategic. The Japanese controlled the roads, the cities, the major strong points, but they never controlled the countryside because they never controlled the information. They couldn't move without being observed. They couldn't plan without assuming the enemy knew. They couldn't trust that any activity would remain secret. This produced a form of strategic paralysis. Even when the Japanese had superior force, they couldn't fully exploit it because they assumed the enemy had advance warning. Even when they achieved tactical surprise, they couldn't be sure it was real surprise or a trap. The uncertainty created by knowing you were always being watched but never being able to identify or eliminate the watchers was mentally devastating. An American military analyst studying Japanese operations in China after the war noted, Japanese forces in China suffered from intelligence failure at every level. They never knew where their enemies were. They never knew when attacks were coming. They never knew if their plans were compromised. This wasn't due to superior enemy intelligence technology. The Chinese had almost no technical intelligence capabilities. It was due to superior enemy intelligence architecture. The Japanese faced an intelligence service that consisted of an entire population.
The principles developed by Chinese villagers in 1940-1945 influenced resistance movements and military doctrine for decades. Vietnam, 1946 to 1975. The Viet Minh and later Viet Cong employed civilian observation networks remarkably similar to Chinese models. Vietnamese villagers used sound-based warnings, environmental signals, and collective intelligence gathering to track French and American forces. The famous bamboo telegraph that frustrated American forces was a direct descendant of the systems developed in Hebei province. Malaya, 1948 to 1960. British counterinsurgency forces faced similar civilian intelligence networks. Their response, winning population support through development and protection, was partly inspired by understanding that hostile populations become intelligence assets for insurgents. Afghanistan, 1979 to 1989, 2001 to 2021. Both Soviet and American forces discovered that occupying forces could never match the intelligence gathered by hostile populations. Afghan villagers tracking Soviet-American movements using traditional communication methods proved remarkably effective. Modern intelligence theory, the concept of intelligence preparation of the battlefield,
now includes civilian population analysis. Military planners recognize that civilian attitudes and behaviors constitute an intelligence factor that can equal or exceed technical intelligence. The irony is that the most sophisticated aspect of the Chinese networks, the use of environmental sounds and natural phenomena as communication media, is rarely studied or taught. Military historians focus on the tunnels, the guerrilla tactics, the weapons. They miss the invisible infrastructure of sound and observation that made everything else possible. This makes sense. Military institutions are built around visible, controllable, replicable systems. A radio network can be diagrammed, measured, and reproduced. A communication system based on wind patterns, bird behavior, and the collective acoustic knowledge of a community cannot be easily systematized or taught. Yet it worked. It worked better than many technical systems because it was adaptive, redundant, and invisible. It couldn't be jammed, intercepted, or destroyed. It existed in human practice and environmental reality, both of which are nearly impossible to eliminate. The human cost deserves one final accounting. The networks saved thousands of lives, but the people who made them work paid a terrible price. Old Chen died from injuries sustained during interrogation. Lu Mi was executed at age 20. Ma Ben-shi survived, but watched dozens of people he recruited get tortured and killed. Hundreds of watchers were shot when Japanese soldiers caught them in suspicious circumstances. Thousands of villagers died in reprisals when the Japanese couldn't find the actual resistance members but needed to terrorize someone. Mrs. Zhang, the woman who learned to listen to ghosts, survived the war but lost her two sons, her mother and her sister, to Japanese violence. When interviewed in 1979, she was asked if the resistance had been worth the cost. She thought for a long time before answering. She said, "Every night I hear them, the ghosts of everyone we lost. Sometimes I wonder if we should have just submitted, just tried to survive quietly. Maybe fewer would have died. But then I remember what submission meant. It meant watching your children starve. It meant daughters taken by soldiers. It meant working yourself to death in forced labor while your occupiers got rich from your sweat. It meant dying slowly instead of dying fighting. We chose to fight, not with guns. We barely had any. We fought with what we had: our eyes, our ears, our knowledge of this land, our ability to work together. And yes, many of us died, but we died knowing we had made them pay for every inch of ground, every day of occupation. We made them afraid. We made them uncertain. We made them lose. Was it worth it? Ask my grandchildren who grew up free because we fought. Ask the villages that survived because we warned them. Ask the soldiers who lived to see victory because our intelligence helped them fight smart instead of just brave." She paused again, listening to the wind outside her small house. She said, "I still listen. Old habits. I hear the wind and I think, southeast, picking up, rain coming. I hear birds and I think, something moved through the east field about 15 minutes ago. I hear trucks on the distant road and I count them automatically, noting their sound, guessing their type. The war has been over for 34 years, but part of me is still watching, still listening, still ready to send the warning that might save lives. That part of me will never stop. That's the price we paid. We learned to turn the world into a weapon, and now we can never hear it as innocent sound again."
In April 1945, as American P-47 Thunderbolts ruled European skies with their 8 machine guns and overwhelming firepower, Chinese villagers were still speaking in the whispers of wind and bird song, fighting their own war with weapons the enemy couldn't see or understand. The two stories, American industrial might versus Chinese civilian ingenuity,
represent opposite approaches to the same problem. How do you defeat a powerful enemy? The Americans built machines that could absorb incredible punishment and deliver devastating firepower. The Chinese built networks that couldn't be touched because they barely existed in physical form. Both worked. Both changed warfare. Both demonstrated that victory comes not from superior weapons, but from superior adaptation to circumstances. The P-47 pilots who laughed at the thundering aircraft in 1943 learned to respect it by 1945. The Japanese soldiers who dismissed Chinese peasants as ignorant and passive in 1940 were terrified of the invisible watchers by 1945. In both cases, underestimating the enemy proved fatal. The lesson? Warfare is ultimately about problem solving. The Americans had an industrial problem. They needed to project power across oceans and defeat enemies with years of combat experience. They solved it with engineering, mass production, and overwhelming material superiority. The Chinese had a survival problem. They needed to resist an occupier with superior weapons, training, and organization. They solved it with organization, observation, and communication methods that used the environment itself as infrastructure. Both solutions were brilliant within their contexts. Both required immense sacrifice and determination. Both changed the course of history. Today, in museums and history books, the P-47 Thunderbolt occupies prominent place. Its specifications are known. Its combat record is documented. Its place in history is secure. The sound-based civilian intelligence networks of Chinese villagers are barely mentioned, their sophisticated operations largely forgotten, their members mostly anonymous. But for 3 years, those villagers achieved something remarkable. They fought an intelligence war against a superior enemy and won. They turned the sounds of nature into a telegraph system. They transformed an entire landscape into a communication network. They proved that the most sophisticated intelligence system isn't necessarily the one with the most technology. It's the one that adapts most completely to its environment and circumstances. The P-47's 8 machine guns spoke with thunder, and the Luftwaffe learned to fear that sound. The Chinese villagers spoke with whispers of wind through crops and bird calls at dawn, and the Japanese Imperial Army learned to fear what they couldn't hear, the sound of an entire population watching, listening, and waiting. Both sounds were the voice of victory. One is remembered, the other deserves to be.
As I write this, 84 years after Old Chen first proposed using sound as a weapon, the last physical traces of the network are disappearing. The villages have been modernized. The tunnels are tourist attractions. The crop patterns have changed with modern agriculture. The environmental sounds are drowned out by machinery and traffic. But in military academies around the world, in intelligence services analyzing civilian populations, in resistance movements studying how the weak can defeat the strong, the lessons live on. They're rarely attributed to specific Chinese villages. They're rarely traced to their origins, but they're there. The understanding that civilians organized for observation become an intelligence service, that natural phenomena can carry information, that the most invisible network is often the most effective. The thunder of the P-47's guns ended in 1945. The whispers of the Chinese villagers' sound-based network
also ended that year. But the echo of both continues, reminding us that war is won not by those with the best weapons, but by those who best solve the problems they face with the resources they have. In Ranzhuang, in a small museum that few visit, there is a recording. It's Chen Mingju, interviewed 6 months before her death, demonstrating how the network sounded. She stands in the wind, describing what she hears, interpreting the birds and the rustling crops and the distant sounds that mean nothing to modern ears. The recording is 11 minutes long. No one listens to it. It sounds like an old woman talking about nature. But hidden in those 11 minutes is the story of how ordinary people became extraordinary, how sound became intelligence, and how the invisible defeated the visible. If you listen carefully, really carefully, the way villagers learned to listen 80 years ago, you can still hear it. The language that was spoken without words. The warnings that were sent without technology. The voices of people who turned the air itself into a weapon and used it to survive when survival seemed impossible. Listen. The wind remembers. The birds remember. The land remembers. And somewhere in the pattern of sound and silence, the story continues, speaking to anyone who learns its language. The thunder has fallen silent, but the whispers remain, if you know how to hear them.